On behalf of GKPD, Global Kashmiri Pandit Diaspora, I welcome you all, my eminent panelists, authors, writers. Kashmir is the promising land of Sharda. It is also called Satisar, Rishi Bhumi, Rishwar. Kashmir has special DNA because it is blessed by Mother Sharda. शारदा देवी की असीम कृपा है कश्मीर पर और इसलिए कश्मीर में ज्ञान का भंडार है. When Europeans were gathering food in forests, Kashmiris were writing books on philosophy, prosody, poetry. There is hardly any field which for centuries Kashmiris have not dealt with. They have contributed immensely. So this legacy was shattered for some time when Islamic rule came to Kashmir. If I say nearly 1 million manuscripts were burnt. But now we have again regained by and by, even in that Islamic period, by and by, great writers were emerged, great people emerged, poets who contributed in different fields. Now, today, we have present generations, great contributors from Kashmir, and on Kashmir. If we see in last 31 years, when we exodus of Kashmiri Pandits happened, nearly 3,500 books to 5,000 books were printed and published. And eminent scholars wrote on Kashmir. So we have here Chandrakanta ji. If I start telling about Chandrakanta ji, I may have to use nearly 40-45 minutes. So I can say that from her first work, Salakon ke Piche or Katha Satisar, I am happy and lucky that when she got the Vyas Samman, I was there. Lot many awards, rewards from President of India, from different academies, Sahitya Academy, and lot many. She is credited with, I can say, novels, उपन्यास, और उनके जो लेख हैं 100 से भी ऊपर हैं. हमारे साथ में रूप कृष्ण जी भट्ट हैं. अभी मैं इनको फोन पर बता रहा था कि he has so many works. So I may need 1 hour to explain about Roop Krishen Bhat. He is a living linguistic from Kashmir. If you want to know about Kashmiri language, so you can refer to Roop Krishen ji on Kashmir. With us is Dr. Rajat Mishra, Professor Rajat Mishra. Rajat Mishra, I have learned one thing from him. Thank you very much, Rajat Mishra ji, that you have taught me that we Indians or Hindus are victims of generational genocide. That is a great sentence which I use in different forms. Rajat Mishra is celebrated writer, scholar, psychologist who had taught in different universities from Hong Kong to India, from US to Europe. And I am so fortunate that his famous work, Infidel Next Door, is published by me. We have with us Aashish ji, young, dynamic scorer, because his 2 celebrated works recently, Warrior Queen, Deda, because Deda I call her the heroine of Kashmir history. She is my favorite. And then Refugee Camp. But he has all the time now to write more and to give the feelings of what he has in heart and mind. And I think time will come when one of his novels will be filmed. And so many requests have come that the lot many dramas or so many things will come up. Ashiji is a great contributor.
We come from Kashmir, we share the same legacy. And I was about 16, 17 when those tumultuous events of 1989, 90 were unfurling. And I can still, recall those intervening 2, 3 nights in Kashmir. We were in Anantnag that time. My father was posted in Anantnag. And I remember my mother was not well and she was advised a surgery. She had a cyst and it had reached a very critical stage where doctor had said that we have to get her operated. And every day for us the struggle was to get her admitted for the surgery, and because of some shoot at sight or something or the other would happen, and we had to come back. And eventually I remember in the night, my sister is about 4 years younger to me, and I was about 16, 17 that time. And the mosque right next door, just a few yards away from us where we would live in Anantnag, we had these mosques who would blare in the night. They would play those tapes, Kafiro Kashmir chhod do, you have to leave, you have to run. If you want to live, you have to run away. If you don't run away, you're going to be killed. And things in Anantnag were not very good that time. And, I still remember, we had to be rescued in an army ambulance in the middle of the night, and how we reached, and that was it. And it was after it took me 2 years as a young boy. It took me 2 years to realize that it was all over. While for my parents, it was still next week, we may go back next week, we may go back next month, that next month, that next week, that next year never came. And by then I had lost about a year and a half of education, which actually meant that I had lost 2 years of education just doing nothing. And beginning having to eke out an existence up a camp first, and then shifting to a room. All my life, the room that we lived in Jammu was the smallest cabin that possibly I've ever had. And it was just about a 10 by 12 room that four of us would share, my parents, my sister and me. And in that 10 by 10 room, we also had a kitchen. So practically when we had to sleep, we had to first clear off the kitchen, only then we could sleep. And then I didn't know what to do, because I come from a generation which had never assumed that you will my generation and the generation before me, my parents, my elders, we had never assumed that something of this order would happen and we have to leave. Nobody was ever ready for that. And I then had to re-begin my education. So I started off from Panipat, then I graduated from Kurukshetra University. I'm a history major from Kurukshetra University. Then I started working out of Delhi, and that was the time, chemicals and petrochemicals was on a boom. I began my journey from there. And those were absolutely tumultuous days. You can imagine, the kind of culture that we are used to, the kind of environment that we are used to, the kind of weather that we are used to. It was excruciating for us to, those summer months, especially in Jammu, in summer months in Delhi, were exceptionally painful. The culture, where we came from a culture where even youngsters, we would not speak on first name basis with our youngsters, and to be spoken to in a manner that was highly offensive to most of us, and continues to be. It takes a long while to get used to. And then I began. It was a very difficult journey. First 5, 6 years in Delhi, and by the time I was picked up by Hinduja Group, those were the days of early media. Media was just settling in India. That time, the cable networks had come in. Crazy things were happening in media. Z had established itself. And from Hinduja Group, I moved to Z, and I had a very long innings there. I had joined as a junior manager with Z, and about a decade of Z, I moved as the group president for entire Z net, not just entire Z network. In fact, all the businesses that Mr. Chandra had at that point of time, my role was common. All the entire go-to-market and most of the new businesses that Z did that time, I was responsible for go-to-market. Quite proud of the fact that India's first DTI service, GIFT TV, was by me. The newspaper DNA, Playwin, the online lottery. Indian Cricket League is very close to my heart. I am the person who thought of it back then, just before IPL, the first 2020 format. And so many things that we got to do in media at that point of time. And after that, I've also had an innings that I was the group CEO for News 24. I have been the business head for Bajaj overseas. Also the business head of content for Hinduja Group. Also CEO of Prakaja Films. Now, it was coming back to Kashmir. Uh, I come from a generation who's sort of we saw Kashmir, and then it just disappeared for my generation. I ideally also represent a generation who's married into a Kashmiri family, but a non-Kashmiri speaking family. Now that is a reality for most of us. My in-laws are from Muradabad. My mother-in-law is a Kashmiri but born in Gurdaspur. My wife and my other siblings within the family, they're all non-Kashmiri speaking people. And now I have a daughter who knows nothing of Kashmir at all. And in fact, she's a child who represents the future generation of Kashmiri Pandits, who always has a question that why are we so passionate about Kashmir? There is so much of bloodshed happening in Kashmir. So why are we passionate about Kashmir? Now, this daughter of mine, who I fondly call Shireen and we call her Ananya formally, brought in the transformation in me and made me realize that I have a responsibility apart from the responsibility that I have towards my family, my career. I also have a responsibility towards my motherland. I have a responsibility towards Kashmir. When my daughter was about 8 years old, I remember that was the time when my elder uncle, my maternal uncle, passed away. The illustrious scion of the Kellam family. You may all know Pandit Jialal Kellam, and that's my maternal family. So when he passed away, that was for the first time when my daughter went to. She was with us in Jammu, and when we were coming back, our flight was from Jammu to Srinagar and Srinagar to Bombay. And when the flight was hovering over Kashmir, and when the flight landed in Kashmir, my daughter had a question for me. She said, "Dad, we are Kashmiris, right?" I said, "Yes." "Kashmir is so beautiful." I said, "Yes, of course." "Then why don't we live there?" I think that was a defining moment in my life when an 8-year-old child is asking you a very important question that Kashmir, we are Kashmiris. It is our land. And above all, Kashmir is so beautiful. Why are we living in monstrous jungles like Delhi and Bombay and those concrete jungles when Kashmir is so beautiful? What is keeping us away from Kashmir? And trust me, I was so full of hatred that time for the people who had thrown us away from our home. I wanted to tell her that there was Islamic Atankad in Kashmir, and we were victims of the jihadist movement, and therefore we had to save our lives, and we were forced to leave. And I stopped. I thought that possibly that was not an answer for an 8-year-old child. And that was the moment I realized that there are million other children who are in that age group who do not know what happened. Or possibly our elders, our elders had a great strength. Our elders were harbingers of peace. I've never heard my grandfather utter something wrong about, the other religions in Kashmir. I never heard my father say anything wrong about Kashmir. And therefore, our children do not know the reality of our past. They do not know the 700-year story of our persecution. They do not know that the gravest human atrocities have been committed on Kashmiri Pandits. Our generation and our future generation do not know. So I thought I needed to do something. But I was conscious of the fact that we come from a fraternity. We are from a fraternity, as Utpalji rightly said. We are one of the, not many people even know Kashmiri Pandits are the only community in the world whose name is in the Guinness Book of World Records for being the only community in the world with 100% literacy. So the challenge for me, I was conscious, and being in media, being a business leader, I knew that my work had to make a difference. It just cannot be one of so many works that are being done in Kashmir, and there are so many. Our community, everybody is a wise man, and everybody's contribution is a scholarly contribution. So the challenge for me was very clear, that do I want to do something that will become one of many, or does it have to stand out? Now, the challenge for our story is that right from Utpal ji to me to everybody, we more or less have all gone through the same fate. To some degree or the other, all of us have met the same fate. I also come from the family of Kashmiri Pandits who has lost about 8 members of a family. My maternal side, 8 members were brutally shot dead by Bitta Karate and all those guys. 10 o'clock in the morning, and their bodies lay there in the compound for 2 days. And the same Mohalla Walas who had assured them safety and security did not even come to attend those dead bodies. Maybe they would have survived. So, for my work, I thought that I need to be, how do I make a difference? Because everybody has the same story to tell. That is the biggest challenge. When everybody has the same story, how is your story different? So I thought of a
आशीष जी आपको 2 मिनट में समाप्त कर रहे हैं.
जी
Sorry.
जी
आप
so
2.
जी
Yes,
so
yes, please. Sorry.
which is where I thought of a very different format, and which is what I experimented with in Refugee Camp. And initially everybody was skeptic whether it will work or not work, but then I'm very happy to say that I think in last 10 years Refugee Camp is the highest ever sold Hindi book on Kashmir in India. I think in the first month itself, we had to do 4 prints, and Refugee Camp remains the only book whose hardcover is the most expensive hardcover in the country, and that is always out of circulation. That's the kind of demand that people have had, and people really appreciated the way they all, whoever has read Refugee Camp so far, they all relate to it at a personal level. Everybody gives the same feedback that I believed it was my story. And I just say that Refugee Camp is the story of Kashmiri Pandits for the entire world. Because what happened in Kashmir 31 years ago is now happening all over the world. Whether you are in Delhi, whether you are in Bombay, nobody celebrates their festivals in peace. We are always under the threat of terrorism. And that happened because everybody turned their head away when Kashmiris were being persecuted 31 years ago. India thought that it is their problem, it is not our problem. Today, it has become everybody's problem. So refugee camp, I think the purpose was to sanitize non-Kashmiri speaking people from southern part of the country, people from Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, to know what happened in Kashmir. And I think that was quite successful. And then, of course, after that, Dida, the warrior queen of Kashmir. I also happened to be, I think, the first Kashmiri writer who wrote in Marathi, Rakht Gulab. It is again the story of Kashmir, which was done by the largest Marathi publisher, Rajhans, which was released just before pandemic. So those are the 3 books that I have, and the 4th one is in pipeline. And so is my research work on the forgotten women of Kashmir. That's my contribution to my motherland, so that people know we also existed and we made a contribution to the world. Thank you.
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद आशीष जी.
तो मैं थोड़ा बहुत बताऊं, आपने जो एक्सपीरियंस वो आपने वहाँ रहकर महसूस की है. मैं तो वहाँ उस वक्त नहीं थी. हम तो नौकरी की वजह से बाहर निकले थे. नौकरी वहाँ हमारी नहीं मिली. मेरे पति में फार्मेसी में डॉक्टरेट है, तो वहाँ जॉब नहीं था. खैर जो भी था, मैं लेखन के बारे में ही बात करूँगी. थोड़ा सा टाइम है मेरे पास. मैं ये कहना चाहती हूँ कि कश्मीर तो खैर जन्म, आप जानते हैं आपके अनुभव कहाँ से आते हैं. जहाँ आपकी जन्मनाल गड़ी होती है, वहीं से आपके अनुभव आते हैं. फिर वो संचित रहते हैं हमारी चेतना में, हमारे मन में. जैसे जो जिसकी जितनी संवेदना हो, जिसकी जितनी ग्रहण शक्ति हो, मैं कहूँगी. मैंने काफ़ी अभी 3 महत्वपूर्ण लिखे हैं, आप पढ़ें. पढ़ें वो बहुत मुश्किल नहीं है। 83 में 84 में मेरा पहला राजकुमार प्रकाशन से शैतान गली का है, उसका अंग्रेजी में ट्रांसलेशन किया है मनीषा चौधरी ने, नाम रखा है स्ट्रीट इन श्रीनगर। वो कहानी वो तब लिखी जब हालांकि आपको मालूम है कश्मीर में कभी रेस्क्यू नहीं था, फिर भी एक आपसदारी थी मुसलमान में। तो एक ऐसी गली की डाउनटाउन की गली कहानी है जो कश्मीर की संस्कृति है, लोक संस्कृति, जो लोग से उसका किसी टच नहीं किया। और ये मैं बड़बोला नहीं है, ये मैंने काफी मैं हिंदी उपन्यासों की बात कर रहा हूँ। कश्मीर पर लिखा तो काफी गया, इतिहास वगैरह इस्लाम बहुत लिखा गया, दर्शन पर मैं हिंदी उपन्यासों में खासकर कश्मीर जो था, ये सैलानी दृष्टि से आपने देखा, आपने सुंदरता देखी, आप झील झरने देखे या ज्यादा से अल्काल दुल्हन देखा, ट्रैवलिज्म देखा। कश्मीर का जो लोग है, कैसे उसका जिंदगी क्या है, वो कैसे जीता है, उसकी संस्कृति क्या है, वो बहुत एक अलग रंग है उसका। वो नहीं आया था, पहली बार आया वो एलन गली जिंदा है। मैं इसलिए कहूँगी उस वक्त शीला संधू थी, बहुत बढ़ती थी वो, उसने बड़ी मतलब एक ढंग की महिला थी वो, बहुत ज्यादा तूल नहीं देती थी किसी को। उसने मुझे घर बुलाया और कहा चंद्रकांता पहली बार मैंने जाना कश्मीर क्या है। पढ़ा बहुत, अभीश मिसानी पढ़ा, आप जानते बहुत दिग्गज कृष्ण चंद्र हुए हैं और मोहन राकेश हुए हैं, जिन्होंने काफी लिखा है, पर वो लोग मानस वो नहीं जानते थे। पर कश्मीरी हिंदू तो जरा बहुत कम ही उनके बारे में लिखा जाता है। बहरहाल ये मैंने तब लिखा, उसका अंत, उसका उपन्यास का अंत था एक, कल आप तो जानते हो एक कपलेट है, कलहन गरी के सरफी सैराब करीम आबन सुई आब सान बापत जहरे हिलाल आशा, क्योंकि वो बाहर जाते थे, नौकरियां वगैरह नहीं मिलती थी। तो ये उसका अंत था। मैं जानती हूँ कि कोई भी लेखक थोड़ा दूरदृष्टा होता है, शायद तभी मुझे लगा कि कुछ होना है, यहाँ वापस नहीं लौटना है। बहरहाल दूसरा उपन्यास मैंने लिखा, यहाँ वितस्ता बहती है, वो मेरे पिताजी का घर वितस्ता किनारे था, वो ये उन पर एक्चुअली उन पर आधारित है। एक अध्यापक, उसका जीवन, वो सामाजिक परिदृश्य किसका किस तरह बदलाव आया समाज में। मैंने एजुकेशन तो मेरी ग्रेजुएशन तक तो कश्मीर में हुई है, बाद में पिलानी में मैंने एमए वगैरह किया, सर्विस वगैरह की 2 साल। तो हैदराबाद में मेरा लेखन शुरू हुआ। देखिए हैदराबाद में कश्मीर मेरे मानस में जिया था, वो मैं भूल नहीं पाई। अजीब बात, मेरे पति कहते थे वहाँ बहुत अच्छे बंजारा ले लो, मैंने कहा नहीं, मैं कश्मीर से इतनी दूर रहूं, घर से इतनी दूर रहूंगी, मतलब ऐसा लगता है घर मेरा वहाँ है। एनीवे जो भी था, मैंने उसके बाद मैंने लिखा कथा सती सर, मैं को पढ़ा जिस पर ईश्वर की कृपा से मुझे बहुत मिला है, महान सम्मान, कई सम्मान मिला है, प्रेसिडेंट्स अवार्ड मिला है, महात्मा गांधी सम्मान। कथा सती सर, उसका अनुवाद हुआ है। अनुवाद कितना अच्छा होता वो मैं नहीं जानती, पर एक पता चलता आपको क्या हुआ, मतलब शैली शब्द वहाँ होता नहीं, अनुवाद उसका हो नहीं पाता। तो उस पर मैंने 8 साल में लिखा। हमारा जो आशीष जी है ना, 8 साल, 2 साल तो मैंने खाली, इंटरनेट वगैरह नहीं था, 2001 में आया था वो। फिर उसमें बाकी कश्मीर तो जानते ही थे, मेरी सास जी, वो लंबी उम्र जी, वो मुझे सब बातें बता क्या हुआ। वो एक्चुअली उसका पृष्ठभूमि जो है उसकी सती सर की जन पौराणिक पृष्ठभूमि, मगर कहानी वो 1931 से 2001 तक क्या कारण हुए, कश्मीर क्यों निष्कासित होना पड़ा हमें, वो स्टेप बाय स्टेप उसमें लिखा है। मैं जरूर चाहूंगी आप लोग उसे पढ़ें, अगर हिंदी में ना पढ़े अंग्रेजी में पढ़े। अंग्रेजी में इतना वो नहीं आता, पर फिर भी ये तो चलता है। एक नियति भट्ट नाम से एक लड़की, पता अनंतनाग से, आप शायद जानते होंगे, माता पिता को, यंग गर्ल है, उसने अचानक लिखा एक क्या नाम है, स्टोल है, उसकी समीक्षा लिखी, एवरीथिंग, ऑलमोस्ट एवरीथिंग अबाउट कश्मीर। इतनी बढ़िया समीक्षा, एक एक पृष्ठ उससे पढ़ा, जेएनयू में पढ़ती है वो, मैं हैरान, मैंने तो इतना पढ़ा, हिंदी में पढ़ा। तो उसका लिखा, उसको अगर आप ना पढ़े तो स्टोल में पढ़िए, वो नियति भट्ट नाम से है, उसमें आप जानेंगे क्या लिखा। वो बोली चंद्रकांता जी, मेरी माँ रोने लगी, वो बोली ये तो हम हैं, जब वो यहाँ पे आ गई थी, वितस्ता कॉलोनी है यहाँ पर नजफगढ़ में, कैसे रह रहे थे, किस हालात में। देखिए एक तो भोगना होता है सामने प्रत्यक्ष, एक होता है जो आपकी मेमोरी में, जो आप महसूस करते हैं, वो उस तरह जैसे आप वहाँ हैं। कश्मीर में तो खैर थे ही, हम ग्रेजुएशन तक हम थे, आते जाते तो थे ही, पर बाद में जो हुआ सो आप जानते हैं, मैं उसमें नहीं जाऊंगी। मैं ये कहना चाहती हूँ, मैंने तब तक लिखा जब निष्कासित, वो सब है उसमें, जो आपने कहा वो भी है, और क्योंकि वो पूरा मैं चाहती थी एक जगह कश्मीर आए, लोग जाने आखिर हुआ तो क्यों हुआ, निष्कासन के क्या कारण है। बहुत 31 से 2000 तक, तो उसमें सब कुछ दर्ज है। तो वो देखकर हमारे क्रिटिक थे, बहुत बुजुर्ग से गुजर गए। मैंने उनसे कहा मुझे बताइए, क्योंकि हम जानना चाहते हैं लोगों पर क्या असर, क्या मानते हैं। तो वो बोले चंद्रकांता मैं भी कुछ नहीं बता सकते, अभी मेरी आंखों में आंसू। मतलब चीज ऐसी हो, चाहे आप वहां ना हो, अगर आप उसको महसूस नहीं करते, यही तो खूबी है। वो पढ़ता है फिर, और हमारा तो हमारी जो दरमियान गाड़ी थी, खैर जो भी है तारीफ मैं नहीं करती, पर मैं ये कहना चाहती हूँ, हमारे एक बंधु हैं, नाम नहीं लूंगी उनका, मैंने कथा सती सर में आपके जो आजकल लीडर हैं उनके व्याख्यान भी लिखे। मेरे पति कहते थे कुछ रिसर्च तो काफी हो चुका है कथा सती सर पर। एक बंदा यहाँ आया था कश्मीर से, तो मैंने सच कहूँ मैंने कथा सती सर उसको नहीं दिखा, अंगली दिखा। बाकी कश्मीर पर मैंने बहुत लिखा, कहानियां देश में लिखी 50 कहानियां कम से। मेरे हस्बैंड बोले तुम मरवाओगी, उस वक्त आतंक चरम पर था, ये मत लिखा। क्योंकि वहां पर लीडर, आज आपके लीडर हैं वहां, जो टीवी पर आकर कहते थे हाँ हमने 40 कश्मीरी पंडितों को मारा, पर वो ही नहीं था। मैंने खाली उतना ही नहीं लिखा, मैंने लिखा हमने कुछ अच्छी बिंदी लिखी है। मैं चाहती हूँ आप पढ़ी हो, अगर हिंदी नहीं पढ़ी तो अंग्रेजी पढ़ी, पर हिंदी पढ़ी तो बेहतर है, क्योंकि वो ज्यादा आपको ठीक लगेगा। अंग्रेजी मैंने थोड़ा एवरेज किया, एवरेज करके भी वो 600 पन्ने आ गया। खैर कहना मैं ये चाहती हूँ कि हम किसी न किसी तरह चाहते हैं कश्मीर वो दिन लौट आए, मैं नहीं जानती, पर कश्मीर में आप तो जानते 7 बार निष्कासन हुआ, हम भी 11 कर रहे थे जब सिकंदर बुद्ध से का जमाना था, और फिर पनपे फिर बढ़े आ गए, वो वापस ले आए कुछ लोगों को। तो मतलब जीवन चला, ऐसा नहीं कि हम रुक गए। इतनी 7 बार उनके बाद निष्कासन करेंगे।
Namaskar. Thanks, Utpal ji, for giving me an opportunity to connect with my community across the globe. I would, to begin with, I would just like to introduce myself in a few minutes. I'm from Anantnag. I did my graduation in sciences from Government Degree College, Anantnag. Then moved to Kurukshetra. I did my master's and PhD in linguistics from Kurukshetra University. And I started my career teaching linguistics and Kashmiri language. I have, in my 7 postings with Government of India, 6 times I got through UPSC, and the 7th appointment was through a high-level committee. I worked as a lecturer. I worked as head of that center in Patiala, as principal of that center. I worked as director, adult education, Government of India. I worked as assistant educational advisor with Ministry of Culture. I worked with Urdu Council. And I finally retired as professor from Central Institute of Indian Languages, Mysore. My subject has been Kashmiri language, linguistics. I worked in the areas of language, literature, culture, mass media, literacy. And overall, I have written around 41 books, all across in these various subjects. But in my heart and my passion is writing short stories. I've written 3 collections in Kashmiri and 1 in Hindi. Fifth one I'm working on in Kashmiri. But Kashmiri language is my main, area. I worked in this area for almost 40 years now. Since I took up linguistics, I worked with preparing the grammatical study of Kashmiri language and published so many, papers and books in the field of linguistics. Post-migration, our main focus was preservation of Kashmiri language in the diaspora, especially amongst our youth, amongst our youngsters. That has been my, main focus for almost 30 years now. And post-migration, our challenge was we had no materials to teach Kashmiri language. Script was the main issue. So we decided that we should go for Devanagari. If we have to preserve the language amongst our youngsters, Devanagari is the only choice, because Hindi and English are compulsory subjects across everywhere. Our child knows Hindi, And if you have to adopt Kashmiri, it is just 6 additional marks we have to remember. So we can easily write Kashmiri language in Nagari script. And this was done with a high-level committee, and thanks to Sargia, our M.K. Kaul Saab, who was the education secretary at that time. He took initiative, he helped us. I was the convener of the committee. There was a group of experts, and we did it. And then finally, we prepared several materials, some books in this field, and also software we developed, which was called Ernimal, later Akruti software, which is now available, and we are working and we are using it for writing and Kashmiri language. And so many people now, almost as per our survey, more than 150 books of Kashmiri literature are written in our Nagari now. We have been trying to get some recognition from the government, which we have failed so far. We wanted it as an additional script. We don't want to replace Nastaliq, but we wanted it as an additional approved by the government of India, which we are working with at this stage, but we have not succeeded so far. Now, so far as my other works, like whatever I write in short stories, most of my focus has been the migration, whatever happened to us, whatever happened to our community. Most of it is written in, most of my short stories are all about migration and post-migration crisis within the community. It also not only about Hindus, Hindu Kashmiris, but only it speaks about Kashmiris, Muslim Kashmiris also, their issues also, their problems also. My other areas have been the translation. I have translated several works for Sahitya Academy. I won also Sahitya Academy's Translation Award. And presently I'm editing VAK. VAK is a literary magazine in Devanagari script, which we have been, working on, and we have, this magazine was started 15 years back. This is the only literary magazine which is going without any government support continuously for almost 15 years now. And we have published almost 54 volumes, and 55th we are working right now. This, we are trying to make it a sort of tool to preserve our language, our literature, and our culture. My request and my appeal to all across the community members is that we have to preserve our language. I'm a staunch believer that the community cannot survive on surnames. We cannot say that just Kauls, Bhatts, Ranas, or whatever, they were Kashmiris. Unless we preserve our language, our culture, we cannot survive as a community. And learning Kashmiri language is not a very difficult tool. As per the survey of UNESCO, and as per the Government of India's language policy, the latest one, a child of 9 years has capacity to learn 5 languages. And it is a matter of learning 3 languages for all of us. Hindi, English, all of us know, and we cannot ignore these 2 languages. Third is our mother tongue, Kashmiri. So knowing 3 languages is not a challenge for our children. We, in our age group, almost most of the Kashmiris know more than 3 languages. We have conducted several programs in this direction. We have conducted so many camps in various cities for the last so many years now, and through many our community organizations like Kashmir Education Cultural Science Society, through All India Kashmiri Samaj, through Kashmir Cultural Trust, through Sampriti. There are many organizations. It's good that in Kashmir, Kashmiri Pandits are associated with many, NGOs, many cultural organizations which are working. Every organization is working towards, it's all, they have different, goals, but the main goal is to preserve our language, our literature, our culture, our community as one, and to fight and to struggle for our issues, for our causes, to keep us united. And I think the Utpalji's this forum, this initiative is also directed towards it, to keep all of us together, to keep us connected, and to work jointly for our common issues, so that whatever we can, whether it is a social issue, it's a political issue, cultural issue, what we have to work together. So then only we can just move in one direction, and then we can get justice, whatever it may be, in any form, whether it's political, social, cultural. And that is it. We have been working, and we should aspire for that. And it's not a big deal. All of us unite together and present our cases jointly and work in areas like language, culture, literature, and our social issues, and besides the political ones. Then only we can survive as a community, and we all have
रूप जी
our goal.
बहुत
Thank
बहुत
you very
धन्यवाद
much.
बहुत अच्छे आपने बहुत सुंदर तरीके से असल पट करो तोहे ऐसे तोरो फिक्री तोहे असल पट सन जिम्मेवारी क्या छ सारनी हन जिम्मेवारी क्या छ
Kashmir put kath karna shme but I understand that this is the
global, because the people from 25 countries will be watching this.
Okay, thank you, madam.
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद आपका. Now we have our I can call him today as the guest of honor because he is the son-in-law of Ranawari also. So Rajat Mitra ji is married to Nidhi Tikku from Tikku family from Ranawari. So I hope and I'm sure Roop ji, Rajat Mitra ji can speak some Kashmiri also. So Rajat ji, please, Rajat ji.
धन्यवाद उत्पल जी. और I consider myself the son-in-law of Ranawari, and you also said that I can, I know Kashmiri and I can speak Kashmiri. Yes, of course I can. And one of the things of being a son-in-law of a Kashmiri household is that suddenly when you are sitting and everybody starts talking in Kashmiri, then you suddenly feel excluded, and then they realize that, okay, what are we doing? He's the son-in-law, we shouldn't do this. So I have learned a lot of Kashmiri words that way rather than in a formal way, right? So, when suddenly people shift to speaking Kashmiri in my presence, I know that, okay, it is something that probably I am, usko sufficiently wo damalu diya hai ya nahi. So I know how to say that, right? So my exposure to Kashmir has been, through that. But there have been also other exposures to Kashmir. To briefly introduce myself, I'm a clinical psychologist. My specialization is trauma, या सदमा कहते हैं जिसे हम हिंदी में. And I'm an alumni of Delhi University and Harvard University. I'm a doctoral in grief and trauma. And it is because of my being associated in, marrying into a Kashmiri household that I got to know the trauma of Kashmiri Pandits. Before that, I did not know. In conversations, on dinner tables, the talk would come up, and I became aware of it, that despite being sufficiently read, I never came across this trauma. So it was one such occasion when one of my Masis, she asked me that if me and Nidhi, that is my wife, we would be interested in working in the refugee camps in Kashmir with symptoms of refugees. I'm calling them refugees because that's the word that was used, right? I prefer to use the word internally displaced persons. So we started working, and in the process, we came across story after story. So what Aashish said some time back, and I was just wanted to comment on that, he said that everybody had the same story. But what I heard was everybody's story was different. Everybody had a different story. So even though it was the same in some respects, that they ran away, they had to leave their home, but every story was unique. And after some time, I'm a clinical psychologist who was used to writing only clinical reports. I have presented reports in United Nations. I felt that how do I tell the story of a whole race, of a whole community? That cannot be done in a clinical report. That can be only done by writing a book. And that's when I wrote this book called The Infidel Next Door, which is based upon my experience of working with both Kashmiri Pandits and Kashmiri Muslims. Kashmiri Muslims, I worked in a place called Tihar Jail. That's one place. I have worked with terrorists in my life. And in Tihar Jail, there was this, there are different gangs who work. And there was one gang which was called a Pattharbaz gang, stone throwers gang. They were from Kashmir. And it was one such person who was an expert stone thrower. He told me a lot about Kashmir, which you don't find in newspapers, which you don't hear anyone. He talked about how he believed that stone throwers will throw out Kashmiri Pandits. And he showed me his skill once about throwing stones. He was an expert. He would tell me things. He would tell me, for example, that when Kashmiri Pandits were running away, we were celebrating. मेरे माँ ने जो है मेरे लिए he said in Kashmiri at that time, told me in Hindi, खीर बनाई थी. हम नए कपड़े पहन के उनको देखने के लिए आए थे कि वो भाग रहे हैं, that they are running away, right? So that was one side. And then I learned from the people in the refugee camps about their trauma. And that's when I came across, which I would like to explain, what's called transgenerational trauma which goes on from generation to generation. It was while coming out that a Kashmiri Pandit, he was a teacher. He accosted me and he said, "Do you know the name of this camp?" So I said, "What? It's Multicam." He said, "No, we call this camp Aurangzeb's dream. Do you know why?" I mean, he was very aggressive towards me. I said, "No." When I came back, I said, "I don't know. I meet all kinds of people every day, and this is another person like that." I discovered that what he was referring to symbolically was Aurangzeb's decision to make Kashmir Islamic. And Muthi camp was the last camp in which all the people ran away. So Kashmir was free of Hindus. So Aurangzeb's dream was completed. So therefore, he and others, they call Muthi camp Aurangzeb's dream. So it struck me that the trauma hasn't started today. The trauma has been going on for 300 years. And that is what I wrote in my book called The Infidel Next Door, which is a story of a Kashmiri Pandit who goes back to Kashmir. So like some of the speakers here have said about how the revocation of Article 370, 35A have changed Kashmir, my book is about what happens when you go back to your roots. Like if today, as Kashmiri Pandits, I see them a new regeneration happening. I was last year in USA on a promotion for my book. And many Kashmiri Pandits told me it's the first time in our life that we have come on the streets and protested in USA on Kashmir. So you see a community whose consciousness is slowly rising. And my book talks about what happens when it starts to rise. What happens when a race, a nation, when a community begins to awaken and speak up. So that is the story of the protagonist of my book. He goes back to a destroyed temple of 300 years, and he finds that next door is a Muslim who has opened a mosque over there and who doesn't want him to be there. So this is the story of Hindu-Muslim relations in India, actually all across the world, because what you see today happening in India is that the Hindus, they are trying to reestablish their rights. They're trying to reclaim their rights, right? It is not that the rights which never existed, they were taken away from us. And what you see is that those rights, somebody who snatched it away is not willing to share it. So what you see in Kashmir today is that the Kashmiri Pandits, Hindus, they lost their rights, they lost their land. And when they are trying to go back and reclaim it, Kashmiri Muslims are not willing to share that. And my book is about that, as to why it is so. So it talks of a very tumultuous, period and a tumultuous phase of interfaith relations. It is being read by people now across the world. Many eminent intellectuals have read it, and they have said that it has changed the way they are looking at Kashmir. They're looking at the Kashmir issue. So I'm glad that in a small way I'm contributing, and if I may say, quote unquote, as a Kashmiri son-in-law, right? So this is my small contribution towards the cause, and I'm proud to be that. I'm proud to actually belong to a community right now which has absorbed me, accepted me as their own. And it is just not limited to food. It is also limited to sharing the trauma, the pain that the community has gone through over the last 300 years. I will share with you a small story which my late father-in-law used to say. It is about Bhat Mazar. He said that when we used to go there, the boatman who used to be Muslim would never stop there. And he told me the story of Bhat Mazar, how people were taken over there to be converted. He told me about how temples were destroyed in Kashmir, how he was a civil engineer, and he told me the mechanism by which it was destroyed. I have written about that in my book, and I must say that these were some of the chapters which most of the established publishers, they said कि अगर आप इनको remove कर दें, if you remove them, we will publish the book, right? And that's the time when I got to know Utpal ji, and I asked Utpal ji that would you publish with all the chapters intact? I will not change a word in this. And Utpal ji was kind enough to say, yes, I will. So I want to thank him for doing that. And it's my wish to say that history which has been suppressed, when it is written about, it is not easy to bring that about. You meet across massive resistance, you meet across denial, and sometimes it may take a decade, more than that, even for people to get back to their roots and start again. And we are on that process. And I'm sure that the coming 10 years, 15 years will be very different for all of us. There will be a new reawakening and a consciousness that will arise from this process. So this is very briefly that I wanted to share about my book. I wanted to share about how I came to write it, and how I feel that it is something that is in a small way adding to the awareness about Kashmir and what the transgenerational trauma that we have all gone through. It is the story of not just Kashmir, but all across, all over Hindus of everywhere. Today, it's a story of Bengal, of Kerala, as to how Hindus are running away from there. And people who are reading the book in Bengal say that this is going to be our story. So my book is also a warning and for things that might come if we don't awaken up right now and face this. So I want to thank Utpal ji and all the panelists for giving me this opportunity, and all the readers across who have done that, who have read my book, and also everyone who's listening to that. With that, I say dhanyavad and thank you, Utpal ji, and everyone.
Thank you very much, and we are so proud of you. How much hard work I personally know by writing this book, and it's a historical document. I can say it is not just a novel or just not a story of next door, but it's a path-breaking story, and it is really what we say as an awakening. Is a kind of a soft warning to everyone. Roopji, I am so thankful to you. You took your precious time, and same way Aashish ji. And with this, I wish you best of luck, and we all will work for Kashmir. We are also going to celebrate Sharda, because Sharda is coming to soon, very soon, joining rest of Kashmir. With this, namaskar. Thank you very much. बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद on behalf of GKPD. धन्यवाद. Thank you.